Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and I'm excited to have two of the leading student loan experts in the country on the show today, Heather Jarvis and Jantz Hoffman. I wanted to bring both Heather and Jantz on to give a comprehensive update on the state of student loans. We talked about how things are going in terms of borrower data and why advisors should care about the current trends. We then talked about proposed legislation and their expectations for changes that are coming down the pike. We then dug into some of the current PSLF issues and got an update on how 97% of borrowers that initially applied for loan forgiveness were denied, and why that's not nearly as bad as it sounds. We also talked about what employers can do to help with their team members with their student loan debt, and closed out with getting more details on the new student loan focused designation, the Certified Student Loan Professional designation, which is offered by a nonprofit group that Heather and Jantz helped found. If you care one bit about student loans, then this episode is for you, as it's full of helpful tips and insights from the leading experts on student loans. Is bookkeeping a major pain point for you? If so, you're not alone. Many financial advisors hate bookkeeping, and guess what? They're often terrible at it too. Enter the Bean team at FA Bean Counters, powered by XY Planning Network. Their free chart of accounts template will help you tackle one of the most basic but often incorrectly done bookkeeping tasks. Visit fabeancounters.com/XYPN radio to download the template and learn how to set up your chart of accounts like a pro. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/194. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Heather and Jantz. Hey, Heather and Jantz, welcome to the show. Thank you so much both for being on today.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, Heather Jarvis, who many of you have either seen speak at our XYPN Live conference. I believe you've done, 3 pre-cons now, 2 or 3 in a row, which is always very well attended, but is our go-to student loan master. We had her on, I thought it had been more recently, but back in episode 48. So xyplanningnetwork.com/48 if you would like to hear more of her career story and some of where student loans were 2.5, 3 years ago now, because that's how many episodes ago it was. But Heather, we're really excited to have you on.
Well, thanks so much. I always love talking about student loans and love talking to you, Alan.
I believe you were credited as being the only human that could keep people interested in student loans for an 8-hour workshop. So,
I mean, the truth is that it's fascinating stuff. It really is. And there are a lot of nerds in the financial planning space, including your fine self.
Exactly. So just really briefly, how did you come to, become a student loan guru? What was it about this area and sort of your background that drew you into student loan?
Yeah, I started by borrowing a lot of money for my education, being a first generation college student. And then I went into a public service career after graduating from Duke Law with $125,000 in outstanding student loans. And so I didn't make the kind of money I might have otherwise made, and had to really get my head around these loans. And I found it to be just as complicated as any other convoluted legal subject I had studied. So it really has become my passion to help other people understand it and help, people who aren't wealthy access education and all the benefits that come with it.
Fantastic. And Jantz, I'll turn it over to you since you haven't been on the show before. We'll dig in a little deeper. What has been your career path in sort of ending up to where you are today as a student loan expert?
So I kind of fell in this by chance. I was running commodity trading advisory, and we were in the process of selling that business, and had a dear friend of mine that had $300,000 in student loans come to me crying because she was getting daily calls from being behind in payments. And at that point in time, income-based repayment had been available for maybe 3 or 4 months, and sort of helped her navigate the process, which back then was significantly more difficult than it is now, if you can imagine that. And from helping her, her coworker needed help. And then I got contact to a university that wanted me to come and talk about this stuff. And I just sort of fell into it and said, if I'm going to be helping these people, I need to really take a step back and dig into the laws and make sure I know what I'm talking about before I start really providing this as a service where I wanted to help people.
And at that time, there wasn't a education course or certification to go through, to go learn this stuff. You really had to read, I guess you were just reading a lot of literal laws to understand how this works.
Yeah, there was Heather Jarvis's blog information that was available early on. And then there was reading information from professor of Georgetown, Philip Schrag, and reading the actual laws that were passed and trying to decipher what they meant and then how to actually work with the loan servicers to implement what they were trying to get done.
And it's so convoluted. I hear, advisors will say like, oh, they're not that bad. Just consolidate the student loans, right? And, my answer is usually if you use the word consolidate, then, go ahead and up your E&O insurance, just sort of in general, because they will remember you're the one who said it 20 years later when they find out that was the wrong call. But, the student loans just in general have become such an overwhelming topic of conversation, and rightfully so. I frequently tell advisors that student loans are more complicated than Social Security because at least when they change a rule for Social Security, they change it for everybody. Or at most you have a different age for when something can happen. But student loans are just a convoluted mess right now. But again, it's topic of conversation that they talk about. That we're delaying, particularly millennials are delaying getting married, they're delaying buying houses, having babies. All of these things are attributed back to student loans. So where are we at today? The number was, we hit $1 trillion in student loans. So where are we at today in terms of like overall student loan debt in this country?
Well, there are more than 44 million people who have student loans these days. And people argue about what the outstanding amount is, but most folks get it somewhere close to $1.4 trillion in outstanding debt. The good news in recent data about student loans, which you don't hear me saying often, is that although the borrowing continues to trend upward, the pace of increase has recently slowed. So we do see growth among debt, but slower growth than we used to. And that's significant. And we're glad to have gotten to that point. It's a little unclear, why that's happening. Some of it is that states are spending more now that the recession is in the rearview mirror. But there's a wide variation, really among states and among borrowers. So, but it's about 2 in 3 college seniors who are graduating with debt. And they are averaging these days about $28,650 in student debt. So that's only 1% higher than the previous year, which is a step in the right direction. The problem, though, also that we're seeing with the newest data and the kind of most recent research regarding student debt is that it really is burdening more vulnerable students and families more than others, which, of course makes sense. We're used to seeing that in many areas, but the burden of student debt is borne disproportionately by, first generation college students from low income families. And those groups also tend to correlate with students of color.
So $1.4 trillion, which is like, we've now hit it's so mind boggling of a number people can't actually wrap their head around it, which is always dangerous. But you said it's still in the total debt is increasing, but maybe not at the same pace. But I do feel like interest rates rising isn't going to be helpful for this as well, right? Because now a lot of the student loan debt is tied to more variable rates that's going to impact. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's been since 2013 that federal student loan interest rates are adjusted annually for the new loans that will be issued in the upcoming academic year. And they're tied to an economic benchmark, the 10-year Treasury note. And we have seen some, variation, but not a whole lot. And we do expect it to go up. My real concern with the present structure for setting interest rates for federal student loans is that although there are caps on how high the rates can go in the statutory structure, those caps are really high. And we could see graduate and professional students, as well as parent borrowers, borrowing at as high as 10.5% under the present scheme. And we'll see if we get there. We're not there yet, but that would be super expensive. And I know your audience knows that, when you look at like an amortization table or you consider how interest accrues over time for borrowers, you realize that, an interest rate at around 10% just makes debt very difficult to get, on top of.
Yeah, like you said, it's just such a big number and a big problem that most financial advisors historically haven't dealt with. But I've been reading some interesting articles that have been coming out about how heavily student loan debt is starting to weigh on the boomer generation. I mean, we talk a lot about it with the millennials because they're the ones taking out the loans. But what are your thoughts, Jantz, around the boomers and that generation and the level of debt that they have started taking on, either co-signing with children or grandchildren, or I guess potentially taking loans out for themselves?
Yeah, there has certainly been an increase. The demographic that seems to be having the highest rate of increase of their average balance is that older generation. And it's even more troubling for some of the clients that I've worked with when we look at individuals who may be desiring to retire in 10 years, but are holding potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans from their children's education. And they're really put in a very, very difficult position where they're trying to manage this massive amount of debt while at the same time trying to catch up on their retirement contributions to get themselves in a position. And I think that whether it be these boomers or the younger age kids that are just coming out of school, the problem is really manifesting in the income-driven repayment plans because of the forgiveness options that exist. And just looking at the direct loans profile portfolio, since 2013, when Heather was mentioning the interest rates were locked to the 10-year Treasury, we've seen a significant increase in the number of borrowers that are repaying their loans, choosing to do so under income-driven repayment plans. So in 2013, only about 10% of the borrowers were using those plans. Now, with the latest data that the Department of Education has released, there's nearly 30% of borrowers repaying their loans using income-driven repayment plans.
So from 10% to 30%, is that an education, the issue that has been solved where now borrowers that are qualified now know that it's an option for them? Or is it, with stagnated wages that just more people are becoming qualified for it just because of lower wages, or a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. You're getting more education out there. Certainly the previous administration, towards the end of their administration, was doing a lot to educate people. They had initiatives working with employers to help inform their employees of the income-driven repayment plans. And while there's a lot of education out there about the existence of these plans, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as to the value that they provide to each individual and how they fit or augment or supplement a comprehensive financial plan for somebody.
It was funny. I was giving a presentation in London. Well, I was actually in Manchester, but giving a presentation to advisors there. And we were talking about serving the next generation because that's a big topic there as well. And it just completely slipped my mind. I started to say something about student loans. And I was like, wait, you don't have this problem here, do you? And they're like, nope, we do not. Whatever side of the political, beliefs that you are, it would be nice if we didn't have this problem. But it's here. Is it here to stay? I guess, what is y'all's opinion around, is this just something we need to accept? We're going to keep moving forward with it, and it's just going to stay here? Or are we going to just suddenly, the government going to write off all the student loans? What are you expecting, and what are you telling advisors to expect?
Well, I see things going in a few different directions. I think the idea that we would stop financing education with debt and education loans, I think, is unlikely, especially in the short term. And there are a number of reasons for that. One of them is that, the federal government actually does pretty well with student loans. And the student loan system generates revenue that is part of the budget for the Department of Education and is used for Pell Grants and other sorts of programs that are for, less advantaged students and families. So there's definitely a kind of a stickiness there that would be hard to overcome.
That is not an argument I have ever heard anyone make, is that this is actually not the worst investment for the government to make a little bit of money.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it is. And, and that's even sort of separate and apart from the way we typically think about government investment in higher education, being from a societal standpoint, that we all benefit when we have an educated workforce, and that enables us to be more productive and effective. And those things are true. But it's also true that having, particularly graduate and professional and parent borrowers paying higher interest rates, that helps to subsidize the lower interest rates and subsidized loans that are offered to undergraduates. So, and the reason, the time that topic comes up the most with me is when I work with universities, which I do often. And they worry that the federal government will, discontinue a program like the Grad Plus loan program that allows many people to pay for these professional degrees. The schools understand that if that program were to disappear, there would be a lot of students who just simply could not come up with the money to pay for that education. Now, there would still be some families who could, but I feel comfortable reassuring those universities that, the Grad Plus program in particular is kind of the cash cow for the Department of Education to use for, these other less profitable loans and grants and such.
Jantz, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I would agree with Heather. And even if, let's say, the Grad Plus program was removed, those individuals that are still aspiring to have those professional degrees are still going to continue that course. They're probably just going to go access private loans with less favorable terms and higher interest rates from the private sector and give that revenue elsewhere. So I think that Heather's right in saying that it's likely that those programs are going to continue. And I'd also like to add to that, when she was saying about the value to the U.S. government, is that currently the largest asset on the books for the U.S. government is student loans.
No way. I did not know that.
That is true.
The question is whether they're going to perform, though, right,
No,
Alan? So,
kidding.
It's one thing to look at the portfolio and say, oh, look, we're owed a bunch of money. And the question is, what's going to happen with that? And Jantz, do I have my numbers right? Is it that only 1/3 of student loan borrowers are actually reducing their principal balance as we speak, and that 2/3 borrowers are either not paying at all because they're in school and still in a deferment, or they have a forbearance or other postponement of their obligation, or they're paying, under an income-driven plan where sometimes their payments are not even, covering the interest that's accruing. So there's a lot of loan volume, but people aren't really making a whole lot of progress with it.
Right. There was probably about half, just over half of borrowers are not even in repayment at all. As you mentioned, they're in school or they're in some sort of deferment or forbearance. And then of those that are in repayment, the number varies over time, but about 18% are delinquent or default. So that leaves very few, a portion of that debt that's actually paying their loans, and then even fewer that are paying down their loans, as you mentioned.
Those numbers are staggering. 1/3 of us have been making payments, and 2/3 of us essentially are not. Like that, again, what's an asset worth on the books? So, and we are going to be towing the line, listeners, on going too political here, because student loans many times dip into politics, and so we'll try to stick to our opinions and the facts here. But there is the argument that is made, Heather, back to your point around what would the schools do. I mean, I've heard, two arguments. Is one, if the government quits backing the student loans, the price of college comes way down, right? And they tie the rise of college education cost with the fact that the government has been supporting student loans, which creates this sort of artificial market. And then also there's the belief of, well, hey, if everyone wasn't getting a graduate school education, maybe it would mean more, because now all of a sudden, your MBA has become what an undergrad used to be. It's just expected in the workplace. So do you have opinions on that, those arguments or words of wisdom for the folks who are sort of on that, on that side of the fence?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the easy availability of student loans affects the price of education and reduces pressure for schools to keep education affordable. But I think, that the idea that that's the whole problem and that all you have to do is do away with student loans is, it's oversimplified, because I think there are a lot of other factors. It is expensive to deliver a sort of traditional education from a 4-year, research-based institution. So I think that's also part of the problem, that the overwhelming majority of colleges and universities try to be like the Harvard model, where you have a lot of researchers doing, work on campus, but teaching is not their only or primary duty. So you're delivering education to students, but you're also doing a lot of other stuff that's expensive. And so not every student or family needs to access the kind of Rolls Royce of education. And we have too many colleges that are trying to deliver a product that looks like that looks like Harvard, when it really isn't, because there is some value, obviously, to having a degree from Harvard. In addition to it being, an education and a credential, it has a certain cachet that can, get you places. But only Harvard is Harvard, and other schools that try to have the same model charge the same amount of money because they are doing these expensive things with their business model. And, universities are burdened by the cost of healthcare, which is a major problem in this country, as well as the cost of energy. And that's part of what rises tuitions. It's not just student loans. It simply isn't, although that may well be a factor. And my concern with the idea of just sort of doing away with student loans, as much as I want to alleviate the burden of borrowing on students and families, I also don't want to just turn around and create a tomorrow where people who don't have their own wealth can't access education, because it is the key to, the American dream and the sort of idea that we should all be able to seize whatever opportunities we're capable of achieving. So, I think we do need to have some access to higher education for everyone, without regard for their personal wealth.
So switching gears a little bit, obviously every administration comes in and makes changes to the student loans. They pass, different laws that help some, but it also complicates it further at times. What are we looking at currently? What are the what's out there currently in terms of student loan legislation that financial advisors need to be aware of that's being discussed and pushed forward?
Well, this really is a very important time legislatively, because the Higher Education Act of 1965 is what controls all this stuff. And the Higher Education Act expires and has to be reauthorized by Congress periodically. It's been expired for quite a while. Congress routinely, punts reauthorization for, a while. But there are signs in Washington that there is bipartisan support for passing a Higher Education Act reauthorization sometime over the next 2 years. So we fully anticipate seeing some, kind of major legislation. And what we know about what that might look like is that there are some areas of agreement. Virtually everyone agrees that the student loan system is overly complicated. In fact, that was part of your introduction, and that's why, Jantz and I are busier than we know what to do with all the time, because this stuff is excessively complicated and needs to be simplified. But the ideas about how to simplify it are complicated, ironically. Yeah. And, there are some very different sort of proposals in place. So there are two primary ones that I would call people's attention to. One is a bill that came out of committee in 2018 called the AIM Higher Act. And the other is, we should also probably consider the Prosper Act, which was part of, which came out of the House committee last year as well. Although the AIM Higher Act is more likely to have traction now because the Democrats are in charge of the House of Representatives and it was a democratically written bill. Whereas the Prosper Act was my main focus, last year before the midterm election. Now it's the AIM Higher Act.
Because the Prosper Act was a Republican-backed bill?
It was, that's okay. Right. And it came all the way, through committee, but didn't come to the House floor for a vote. Although there were a number of people that really wanted to see it come to a vote. There was enough opposition within the Republican Party that it wasn't seen as something that was going to pass, which is why it wasn't brought to the floor. So now it's not that we forget about what's in the Prosper Act because it's still a blueprint of what the ideas are of some leaders in the House, but it's not likely to pass in anywhere like its current form. The AIM Higher Act has a better shot at being the sort of thing that the House might actually entertain or even potentially pass. But then, of course, with the way legislation is made, there would also have to be Senate agreement. So we need to consider the ideas that are coming out of the Senate. And what we'll end up with is likely to be a bipartisan bill since we have split control of the houses. And it's likely to be the result of a kind of a traditional negotiation among lawmakers. But the major, sort of differences we see is the Senate proposals as laid out by Senator Lamar Alexander has a very controversial and interesting proposal to mandate withholding from employment paychecks for student loan payments. So it would require employers to withhold student loan payments and pay the government directly for the payments that are due from their staff.
So this is similar to, we've heard of that for, child support, payments that aren't being made, something like that. So it would really turn it into something that will get paid one way or the other.
That's right. And, the arguments for such a thing is that it certainly enables the lender, the government, to have, more ready access to, essentially force people to pay their student loan payments before they pay other things. And also it would potentially simplify things for borrowers who wouldn't have to, keep on top of it if it was all sort of automated as part of their paycheck. But, there are certainly, I think, big problems with those proposals as well, that then you have borrowers in these withholding circumstances where there's not flexibility and they're not able to make decisions on a, paycheck to paycheck basis, which is the reality of, many Americans. So it doesn't, really account for people who have fluctuating incomes or seasonal incomes. And I think Jantz has, is definitely some thoughts on this as well, but it seems like it would be very complicated for employers, because they would still have to apply some formula, to how they're going to withhold these wages. I have concerns about things like, privacy, for borrowers, as well as, the risk of liability for employers. So, this mandatory payroll withholding is going to be a big subject of debate.
Yeah, Jantz, anything to add to that?
The general idea of being able to payroll deduct seems like something that would be good in theory, but in practice may be very challenging. If you look at big employers, your Walmarts and your Amazons, they may have the ability to have some sort of payroll deducted student loan option. But for the vast majority of employers that exist out there, they are small business employers with 4, 6, 10 employees. And you're talking about an entire additional payroll system on top of what they're already paying. And that would be very cumbersome. You add to that all those individuals that may be independent contractors or sole proprietors. It just makes it very difficult to figure out how, in practice, you would actually go through withholding these payments. And I think what Heather touched on briefly at the beginning is it'd be very concerning to individuals who maybe are living paycheck to paycheck, and for a period of time, they may not be able to pay rent or put food on the table because they had money taken out of their paycheck first. And there are some serious concerns of what could happen to those individuals.
And, what would an employer do with that information? We would hope nothing, but, that's the kind of personal information that you could use against an employee come salary negotiation time or, that sort of thing, if you know what level of debt they're in and that sort of thing. So again, I would hope no one would do that, but they could.
They could. And also, even if there was no nefarious intent, just having access to that information, it becomes vulnerable, and we hear so much about hacking and data breaches, when the information is in the hands of, multiple entities, it's easier for it to get out and be misused.
So it sounds like that was the proposal last year that is currently DOA, since the Republicans are no longer in control of the House. So what are the highlights of the AIM Higher proposal, and how do they, how do the two laws or proposals differ from one another?
Well, and to clarify, Alan, the mandatory withholding that we've just talked about has actually been reinvigorated again this year because it's it's a proposal in the Senate.
I see. So it's still alive and well.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the AIM Higher Act is interesting in that it also aims to simplify repayment options, which is, as I sort of led with, a common goal, which I think important for us to start with, like, what can we agree on? And so what it would do is reduce the number of loan repayment options for borrowers into a fixed repayment plan with either a 10 or a 25-year repayment period, depending on the balance. And then it would offer one income-based repayment plan, whereas now there are 5, which is extremely confusing. And what the AIM Higher Act would do that I think should be of significant interest to your audience and financial advisors, because financial advisors work most often with graduate and professional borrowers. So people who have high student debt burdens and extensive educations, who also have then, good jobs and are the, kind of high net worth individuals of tomorrow. So that group of people would be subject to a very different income-based repayment scheme. And what the proposal is to calculate the payments for borrowers based on their income ranges. So as it is now, people are paying 10 or 15% of a figure called discretionary income. They get to protect from payment 150% of the federal poverty rate that corresponds with their family size, which is, it's around 18 grand people can earn, and then they have to pay 10 or 15% of the amount they earn above that. Whereas the proposal in the AIM Higher Act is to say, well, you only have to pay 10% of your income that exceeds 250% of the federal poverty level. So giving people a larger sort of protected amount of income, but that payment is only available for people who make less than 120 grand a year. And that if you make more than $120,000, then you get a progressively lower percent of the poverty line deduction that's excluded. So essentially what it means is that for people who earn more than $170,000, they'd end up paying 10% of their total income, 10% of their income without any exclusion for that poverty rate. And, that would change a lot of people's calculations in some, pretty significant ways.
So basically the floor is raising as you make more money, but at 120,000, the ceiling is being raised, but at 120,000, the floor starts dropping until 170,000, and then it's just all available for student loan payments.
Exactly. And so it really does focus more, it continues to focus on income without an eye toward net worth. And I think Jantz and I see a whole lot of cases where you've got people who have good, strong incomes, but they don't have, they're still trying to get to zero in terms of their net worth because they have these expensive educations with these, high balances. And that's why there's, a lot of really elaborate sort of advice that borrowers can benefit from with, knowledgeable advisors who can say, hey, if you pick this plan and you pay this much over this time and your income does X, Y, and Z, then you can qualify for cancellation, forgiveness, and, there's all kinds of tax considerations. So those sorts of strategies that are, in place now would continue to be available for people who already have student loans. But a new generation of students would have a whole new scheme that is supposedly and meant to be simpler than that going forward.
Simpler, but with fewer options come fewer options, right? So there's also this, while the options are really complicated, there's no way you can turn 5 options into one and it benefit everybody. So are there particular borrowers who, or, that should be concerned that their benefits of the, one of these particular programs will definitely be on the chopping block as part of that simplification?
I do think so. I mean, I think that it is extremely likely that the Congress will find a way to reduce the generosity of the forgiveness provisions, particularly that are associated with the income-driven plans, and reduce the forgiveness for high-income borrowers. With, high income being a one measure, as we're saying, of wealth, but not the only one that matters. So, if I were a student contemplating, getting a lot of expensive education, I would be concerned about my, ability to afford to repay it, or at least I would have to understand that, I'm going to pay a larger chunk of what I make towards my student loans.
Yeah, it seems like the two things that are ignored here are net worth. While probably not that big of a problem, there's certainly going to be, borrowers who are who may have net worth from inheritance or whatever, and then, can keep their income low and avoid payment. I'm sure that's not a massive problem, but it is a loophole. But also cost of living isn't factored in. I mean, $120,000 in San Francisco will get you a studio, and in South Dakota, it'll get you, a city. So, is there ever any talk about trying to allow for those folks who are living in higher cost of living areas to get some of the benefits here too? Because it seems like that's going to really hit those high cost of living areas hard.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I don't see any appetite for consideration of those factors within the, sort of official federal student aid system and legislative system. Primarily for the reason we were mentioning that, everybody's all about simplification at this point. Let's make it simpler, which, just as you said, means, fewer options, and it ends up being, kind of less precise or potentially less fair for people who are in unusual situations, like living in particularly expensive areas. I do sometimes see cost of living adjustments being incorporated into the design of loan repayment assistance programs, especially those that are created by or administered by locales, sort of geographically. But Congress doesn't seem to care because, they're very everybody's got their own backyard, right, in Congress, because they're elected by a certain place, and those are their constituents. And so, you'll hear some agitation for those sorts of considerations from people from a high cost of living area, but then you'll have the folks from lower cost of living be like, this isn't fair for us. So they don't usually tend to go very far.
So, Jantz, I'm curious on your opinion of, realistically, and I know, rationality and realism doesn't always apply to what happens behind closed doors in DC, but what could we expect to see from these two very different, but moving us forward, maybe not necessarily the best way, depending on your beliefs, but merging of these two bills? Is there something realistic that may actually come of these that we could be looking towards?
Yeah, I think that over time we will see change. Certainly simplification is needed. The complexity that exists now is cumbersome, and to think that borrowers themselves are supposed to be able to navigate this when people with degrees in finance and who provide tax and financial services have struggled to wrap their brains around it, but we expect a nurse or a teacher to understand all of this is a bit ridiculous of us. I also think that when Heather was talking about the different bills and sort of setting a common goal, I think that oftentimes what gets lost in the consideration of the costs of these income-driven repayment plans is the fact that in general, these income-driven repayment plans are allowing people to pursue these higher degrees, which otherwise they may not. And while we can look at the costs directly tied to repayment of the student loans, we also should have some accountability to the fact that individuals who have greater education and greater degrees generally have higher incomes. And there is a 100% correlation to higher income and a higher tax base. So while the government may be subsidizing some of these individuals to advance their career in terms of repayment to their student loans, they're going to be winning from the standpoint of what they're receiving in tax revenue as these incomes increase due to this enhanced education. So I think that's an important part that gets missed when we're talking about Congress talking about these income-driven repayment options and how to repay student loans. They don't also look at the increased tax base that they're receiving from the benefit of having a higher educated population.
So, we are now in the middle of all of the public service loan forgiveness, the PSLF and income-based repayment, all of that starting to hit, right? Like the 10-year hit. We're still waiting on the 20-year. When did that actually start hitting? Remind me of my dates.
It was October 1st, 2017 that the first borrowers were theoretically beginning to be eligible to apply for cancellation because it had been at that point 10 years since they started making payments.
So we're a year and a couple months in. How's it going?
Well, it's funny you should ask, Alan, because actually you'll be shocked to learn that the student loan system is not working particularly smoothly in this or any other instance. So, it's interesting. There's data that are alarming, but in my view, not quite for the reason that some people think. So the media tend to oversimplify student loans, understandably, because no one would want to read the details required. But there's been a lot of talk about how, applications for public service loan forgiveness are being denied. And that is true. The data show that as of last summer, there were around 30,000 people had applied, but almost all of them, 98%, were denied for various reasons. Now that
98%? How is that even possible?
Right. So it is shocking. And the reason it's shocking is because it shows you how convoluted the program is and how unable and unsuccessful borrowers have been in navigating the system. They are not getting the information they need. The information they're getting is incomplete or non-existent. But what's not shocking for people like Jantz and I, who have been doing this for a long time, is that we never expected very many people to qualify for forgiveness this soon. What's amazing is that so many people applied when they had no chance of being granted forgiveness. And that's because people didn't have eligible loans. Back when public service loan forgiveness started 11 years ago, more people had those older federal loans from the program, federal family education loans, and they didn't have the ability to or the information about what they needed to do to make their loans eligible. Similarly, income-based repayment, which really is the key path to public service loan forgiveness, didn't become available till the summer of 2009. So it isn't until this summer of 2019 that Jantz or I would have expected very many people to have been able to meet the requirements of the program. So although it's shocking that so many people are denied, it's shocking because they never should have applied because they had no chance of being approved because they didn't meet the requirements of the program. But it's horrible. They thought they had because their loan servicing companies and the whole system had done such a poor job of explaining what they needed to do to be successful.
Yeah, that's pretty disappointing. It's one thing to apply and not qualify, but it's another thing to just believe that you're supposed to qualify and not because of misinformation. It's probably devastating for a lot of folks.
It really, really is. And these are people who have chosen careers in the public interest. They have chosen to work for government or nonprofit employers in order to make a difference for us all, and they are paid less because of it. They're paid less than they would be paid in the private sector. And public service loan forgiveness is designed to encourage and permit those people who are inclined to do that to be able to. And we need educated people in those jobs. So it's really unfortunate. It highlights the complexity of the system and the just shoddy nature of student loan servicing. And those are those, companies that are hired by the government to administer the loan programs. And, they're taking a lot of heat for it. So, sort of what the solutions are, it seems like, to this public service loan forgiveness problem is we've got a bunch of lawsuits, a bunch of litigation that's been going on about public service loan forgiveness, as well as several government watchdog organization reports about loan servicing. And then finally, an temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program, which is meant to be a sort of a Band-Aid fix for some of the borrowers that got the wrong information and so chose the wrong repayment plan.
Do you think those actually stand a chance of making it through? Because we've heard a lot about, poor servicing just overall, that, payments not being applied correctly and loans getting bounced around and no one can, all of a sudden payments aren't getting made and no one knows why. Do we actually think, and Jantz, I'll ask you this, do we actually think that some of these lawsuits will succeed? And if so, what cascading effect does that have on sort of the student loan industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think there's going to be, in my personal opinion, some limited success with those lawsuits. I mean, ultimately, it's quite clear what borrowers need to do to achieve public service loan forgiveness. And some of these lawsuits have to do with servicer information, not necessarily did people follow the correct paths. But, if you look at that GAO study, which Heather was referencing, where 98% of people were denied, they also looked and said that there was 1.173 million people who had indicated that they were intending to work towards public service loan forgiveness. They may not have applied for the forgiveness, but they indicated that that was their desire. And only 520,000 of them have recorded at least one payment towards that public service loan forgiveness. So what you see is there's this massive disconnect of information of what people actually have to do. And even those individuals that applied, that are filing these lawsuits, how many of them met with either a tax professional or a financial professional that was aware of their circumstances of student loans, but were unable to identify that they were not taking the appropriate steps to achieve that? So as we look at these lawsuits, I'm actually interested to see if some of this fallout ends up on the shoulders of the financial services industry for not providing that fiduciary responsibility to their clients.
So, with all of the issues with student loans, obviously education is one piece for the borrowers. But, for our listeners, educating yourself as an advisor and knowing what options are available out there. One program that I'm interested in hearing your opinion on is that there was an IRS opinion letter that came out regarding using 401k matching. Using your 401k matching in order to pay towards student loans. So basically, instead of one of our team members contributing to their 401k and us matching, we match 4.5% of the 6% that they put in their 401k. Instead of their money going to the 401k and our money going into the 401k with a match, their money could go towards student loans and our money would still go into the 401k. So they would still get that matching contribution, but they could put it towards their student loans. I have been trying to get this done with our 401k provider, but they are unable to do it at this time. Do you see this as a potential growing trend in that specific instance, or are there other ways that employers are diving in and trying to help their employees regarding student loans? Because financial stress is not good, in a workplace environment. So it is something that, as employers, we need to be thinking about.
So I personally am pretty familiar with that IRS ruling with regards to the 401k plan that you're talking about. And there are some private vendors that are really pushing that ruling. But I think what needs to be clear to all employers and people out there is that was a private letter ruling, meaning that ruling was issued and was limited to only that one 401k plan that that company had established and submitted to the IRS for approval. It's not a general letter ruling and cannot be relied upon or used by any other employer if their plan was to be audited to say, this is why we made this contribution. If the IRS has some subsequent general ruling out there that this is allowable in general, then people could use it. But at this point in time, that letter ruling is not backing for any employer if their plan was audited, meaning that those contributions could have to be reverted or could be ineligible contributions. So I would caution any employer that's looking at that 401k model under the current regulations that are out there of utilizing that private letter ruling for the basis of their own 401k plan. With that being said, I would say that there are a number of employers out there that are looking to provide benefit to their employees with regards to student loans. But as Heather and I were talking right before the podcast launched, for private employers, currently that is, from the IRS's standpoint, those assistance and payments for student loans is just considered ordinary income and subject to all the taxation that any other ordinary income would be. So you're just as well off giving that individual money as you are making a payment to their student loans under the current IRS regulations.
Yeah, kind of disappointing. But are there any things as an employer that we could do to support our team members short of just, here's $100 to go put towards your student loans?
Well, there are, we're seeing, that sort of as a trend. Employers are trying to work out what they can do. And it hasn't been, entirely successful. Like, I'm concerned that, a lot of employers are, getting a partnership with a private lending company that will refinance student loans for their employees, sometimes at a reduced interest rate. And that can be useful for certain borrowers, but it can also be foolish for many student loan borrowers, and it needs to be an individual decision. So I think employers should be very cautious about promoting refinancing as a solution for student loan debt, because it is only good for those people for whom it's good, and it's bad for a lot of folks. And so it's again, sort of oversimplified, like not really the way to solve the problem, or not completely the way to solve the problem. So employers are, the best sort of employer programs are, a matter of having, some more money for folks, whether it be for their student, specifically for their student loans or for their just straight up compensation. But they're doing things like actually paying people's student loan payments directly. So I think that they see that as a benefit package where you can sign up to have money pushed to your lender on some kind of a schedule. And I think that can assist borrowers who are, in a position where they need to pay more quickly and in order to avoid interest. But again, my concern being that there really isn't a one size fits all approach. So there are some employers that do, fancy things like hire somebody like me, for example, to be available to speak to their staff about their own circumstances and really do worthwhile, individualized, personalized counseling and advice. As you both know, though, I don't believe that student loan borrowers just need a student loan expert. I want to see people with a real financial advisor that knows a lot more than what I know. I know a lot about student loans, but they need somebody to help them with, retirement information, insurance information, and tax planning, and all the things that you guys know that I don't know that have to be considered together with student loans. So I think that is the ideal that we would like to see, employers moving toward in their thinking. And, again, it's another way that we can try to hopefully work with our lawmakers to say, let's do something to sweeten the pot for employers so that employers will get some tax relief for assisting, with student loan payments, for example.
Yeah, I think that, Alan, that there are some things employers can do that have little to no cost, right? Formatting of paychecks to help facilitate the appropriate calculation of income-driven repayment plans is something that is very little cost to an employer, but can provide a great benefit to their employees. As Heather mentioned, those consultations with a knowledgeable advisor about what their best repayment strategy is. So for some people, that private refinance may be perfect. For others, they may be intending to use an income-driven repayment plan, but the determination of that is important. And if employers could help their staff by having a subsidized meeting with a certified student loan professional that could help with that determination, that would provide great value. When I was back east, with Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, which is a big teaching hospital in New Hampshire. They have a really great program put in place where they will pay for meetings with fiduciary RIA advisors paid for by the hospital to talk about anything with regards to the employee's finances. And when I was back there, we had them include in that the ability for their staff to have a consultation strictly about student loans from a knowledgeable, trained financial professional. And this was, again, paid for by the hospital. Benefits like that, I think, are very valuable, and I think will grow as what we've seen in the industry is we've seen AUM fees getting squeezed, especially when you look at 401k plans. And with that reduction in fees, there's just not enough resources for the employees to have actual advice provided to them. So if we're squeezing those fees down within the 401k plan, we still need to step up to the plate as employers to make sure that our employees are getting that financial advice.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What would be better, to put $100 a month towards a team member's student loans, or put $100 a month towards them getting access to a real financial planner and getting an ongoing relationship with someone who also has a student loan expertise? Because that's something we're working on. It has turned out to be much more complicated than we realized, but that's a team member benefit we're going to be rolling out here at XY for our team. Our staff is the ability to get subsidized fees towards a relationship with a financial advisor.
That's so cutting edge. That's very cool.
Well, you can't, come on. I mean, like, I feel a little weird saying that we haven't already done it, because here we are, like, all of our team is helping all of these financial advisors do all this great work. Like, they need to experience the great work that our advisors do. So when we say, that we're here to help our advisors help their clients live their great life, they get to experience that and see it, which was really the reason that we started building out the program. But it is an interesting question on, if I could take that money and put it towards your student loans, what would be more beneficial? And the truth is, I think them getting a financial planner is going to be the most beneficial, to your point earlier, Heather.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree completely. I can't think of, a single student loan borrower who's better off with $100 than they are with someone who knows what they're doing, looking at their student loans and their, larger financial picture.
So, Jantz, you mentioned the Certified Student Loan Professional designation. So, Heather, you and I have known each other for a very long time. I have always sent people to your course when they ask, how do I learn more about student loans? And so you had the course that you've done at the conference as well as the online program. But one of the things y'all have been working on together is building out a more robust certification that is accredited to be able to help advisors learn more about student loans and be able to help their clients and integrate student loan planning into their financial planning process, right? It's not a standalone thing. To your point earlier, Heather, you can't talk just about student loans without kind of knowing what the retirement plan is and where are they going to be moving and income changing and that sort of thing. So talk to me a little bit about the student loan professional certification, where that came from and how, just overall information about it.
Well, the first step of where it really came out of was the fact that we believe that people with student loans need this sort of assistance. But we also believe that they need to be able to identify which financial professionals they can go to that really know their stuff, because a financial advisor that halfway knows student loans can cause a lot of damage to a borrower by giving them poor advice, maybe recommending that they do a private refinance when they could have had public service loan forgiveness. These are imperative for the people burdened with student loans that are not experts in financial services in order to navigate the process and determine what their best options are. So what we wanted to do was create that mark so that we could have a network of advisors, tax professionals who know this stuff so that the borrowers can get this assistance. And Heather and I have been working hard along with the rest of the board to create this course. The coursework is offered under the California State University system in a partnership with Humboldt State University. So it is a 2-unit, 400-level business course, so everyone's getting college credits for doing it. Because of that relationship, the FINRA recognizes the designation as an accredited designation. So FINRA has a number of designations listed on their site. but there are only 20 or so that they recognize as accredited designations. The CFP board has been gracious enough to allow us to give 23 hours of continuing education credits for those that go through the coursework. So we're looking at almost a full 2-year cycle worth of CE for the CFPs. For those people that are CPAs, most states will give them 30 hours of continuing education credits for taking the coursework. But it is robust and comprehensive, and we get into the weeds because we really believe that if someone's holding themselves out to the public as a specialist here, that they need to be able to get into the weeds with them and to be able to provide proper advice. And as Heather mentioned, it doesn't just talk about student loans. We're talking about tax planning, implications of taxes, different parts of the code section, how financial planning integrates into repayment options. It's extremely complex and comprehensive, and the course is designed to help give somebody the framework they need to be able to help people in practice do good work here.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Jantz has already said. We're super proud of what we've created because it's very useful for advisors. It takes you through the process from the beginning all the way through, and it provides a framework that you can use in your practice for everything from intake to analysis to, counseling. And it's not just the educational component and the earning of the certification that you can use for, marketing to new clients. We also give a tremendous library of resources, which includes, like the materials I've developed over many years, checklists for, interviewing a client, gathering records, how to analyze it, how to, and that kind of stuff. Like, Jantz and I have got, between the two of us, decades of experience honing these tools. And that's what you need in a practice environment are the tools. We also sort of show, various kinds of ways you can do calculations using some of the different tech platforms that are available, both free and charged. And also, the way you can kind of do it with Bubblegum and Excel, which is how I roll, And it's all there, and it will enable an advisor to be confident that he or she is not going to miss something that's important and subject themselves to, criticism and liability. And they'll be able to go and really start helping people. And it's I think people are going to find it's a terrific way to differentiate yourself among, there are a lot of good financial advisors. And if you want to work with, kind of young professionals, people who have expensive educations, you got to know this stuff. And, otherwise you have to not work with those folks. So, it's really cool. I'm just super excited about it.
I can tell you're both so pumped, which I love. And I'm pumped for this as well. I know, Heather, this is something you and I talked about, I think when we first met, that we needed more education about this. And I'll say that probably a third to half of the people that go through your course at the conference walk away and they say, I just learned so much and I'm going to refer all of my student loan business to someone else in the room. So, because it is, you get into it and you realize like, oh, this isn't just like learning how IRAs work. Like this is a big freaking deal and a ton of content. So just curious, is there a entry point that you recommend for an advisor? It's like, I think I want to learn more about student loans, but I don't know if I'm ready to commit to the full program. Is there sort of an entry level education, or do you say, look, just dive in, go through it, and then you really won't know until you get through the program?
I mean, for the designation itself, if you want to become a certified student loan professional, you have access to the full course materials, and you don't have to study it all if you already know it or if you don't find it interesting. But you do have to pass a rigorous examination that shows that you can handle the analysis of a complicated student loan case. So the designation is for people who who want to explore that notion. But there are certainly people that are more interested in just having sort of an introduction or getting their feet wet. And that's probably where I would say, that my training programs, there are other sort of, standalone modules or, a little series that is less thorough. And even, I know this is going to sound insane, but even my full day workshop that we do as a pre-con for XY Planning Network is less comprehensive than this, because this is more than 8 hours. People always laugh at me, but I could talk about this stuff for a week and and still be going.
So with the program, what is the expectation in terms of, I'm ready to dive in? How long is it going to take me to get through the program, or maybe number of study hours that you expect to be able to get through the program and be able to pass the examination?
So when you sign up for the coursework, you have 6 months until you're required to sit for the exam. That the coursework is a 2-unit, 400 level business course. So think about the amount of effort and time you would put into an upper division 2-unit college course where you're meeting twice a week plus reading and study material. Now, the course is delivered electronically with the resources and reading material all in it. So you could, in theory, push through it and be ready to take the exam in probably as little as a month or two. But for most people, they are taking their time going through the material. They'll go over some lectures multiple times, dig into the reading material, take the quizzes, and you're really looking at probably a multiple month commitment before you're ready to sit for the exam.
All right. Well, it's awesome to see that this is continuing to grow and gain steam. Like I said, more and more advisors that are wanting to work with younger clients, more firms that are allowing their young advisors to start working with younger clients. And again, to the point earlier, a lot of our older clients are coming to us with student loans and co-sign the loan that we told them not to co-sign. They did anyway, and now they're saddled with the debt because grandkid didn't finish the education program or whatnot. It's going to continue to be an issue. So I'm thrilled to see that we have programs out there to continue to learn, and we'll be iterating, with new laws and regulations. So, Heather, Jantz, thank you both so much for taking the time to come on the show. This was a lot of fun, and I learned a ton. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Always great talking to you.
Thanks, Alan.
Is bookkeeping a major pain point for you? If so, you're not alone. Many financial advisors hate bookkeeping, and guess what? They're often terrible at it too. Enter the Bean team at FA Bean Counters powered by XY Planning Network. Their free chart of accounts template will help you tackle one of the most basic but often incorrectly done bookkeeping tasks. Visit fabeancounters.com/XYPN radio to download the template and learn how to set up your chart of accounts like a pro. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.